Good morning and welcome to the National Transportation Safety Board. I'm Jennifer Homendy and I'm honored to serve as chair of the NTSB. With me today are member Michael Graham and member Tom Chapman. Today's meeting is open to the public in accordance with the Government and the Sunshine Act. We're here to discuss our investigation of a crash that occurred on July 12, 2023 near Highland, Illinois. A motor coach carrying 21 occupants was traveling westbound on Interstate 70. At about 1:48 a.m. Central Daylight Time, the motor coach departed I-70 for the Silver Lake Rest Area exit ramp, where it collided with 3 tractor trailers that were parked on the right shoulder of the exit ramp. As a result, 3 motor coach passengers died. 11 other passengers plus the driver were injured. The 3 truck drivers who were inside the vehicles at the time of the crash were uninjured. I want to take a moment on behalf of the entire National Transportation Safety Board and offer our deepest condolences to those who lost loved ones or were injured in this tragic crash. We are truly sorry you experienced such a tragedy, and please know that everyone at the NTSB has one goal: to learn all we can about how this crash occurred and issue safety recommendations aimed at preventing it from happening again. Let's now turn to today's meeting. Each board member has studied the draft report and met individually with the investigative team, but this is the first time we've gathered as a board to discuss the report. In a moment, NTSB staff will present the pertinent facts and analysis and summarize their findings in detail. After their presentations, board members will examine the key safety issues uncovered during the investigation. Staff will then propose the relevant findings, probable cause, and safety recommendations for board consideration. Following the incorporation of any amendments voted on today, the final report will be available on our website in just a few weeks. The public docket for this investigation was released on July 17, 2024, and contains over 1,200 pages of additional relevant material. It's available on our website at ntsb.gov. Before we hear from the investigative team, I would like to invite member Chapman, who was the board member on scene during this investigation, to make a statement. Member Chapman, you're recognized if you'd like.
I appreciate it, Chair. I'll be very brief. I want to thank the staff for their hard work on this report. As you mentioned, I was the board member on scene in Highland, so I witnessed firsthand the expertise and the dedication the team brought to this investigation. As usual, their work was outstanding. I also want to join you in expressing my profound condolences to those who were injured and to their families, their friends, and their loved ones, and certainly to the families, friends, and loved ones of the 3 passengers of the bus who lost their lives in this terrible tragedy. Our thoughts remain with all of you as you continue to navigate your loss and your grief. The team here at NTSB is committed to advocating for meaningful safety improvements based on the lessons learned from our investigation. Please know that we will continue to push for the implementation of the safety recommendations adopted and reiterated today, so other families will not have to endure your heartache. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to offer these comments.
Thank you very much, Member Chapman, and thank you for all your work on scene as well. I'm now going to ask Deputy Managing Director for Investigations, Brian Curtis, to introduce members of the NTSB team that are participating in today's meeting. Good morning, Mr. Curtis.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Homendy and board members. My only administrative announcement this morning is for the meeting participants to silence their electronic devices at this time. I'll now introduce staff for today's meeting. Unless otherwise noted, staff are from the Office of Highway Safety. Dr. Chris Poland, Acting Director for the Office of Highway Safety. Dr. Sheldon Russell, Report Development. Steve Prouty, Investigator in Charge for the accident. Dr. Raphael Marshall, Human Performance. Mike Fox, Motor Carrier Factors. Jennifer Adler, Director for the Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications. Tom McMurray, General Counsel for the NTSB. Barbara Czech, Director for the Office of Research and Engineering. Julie Perot, Safety Recommendations from the Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications. Ron Kaminsky, Survival Factors. Dan Walsh, Highway Factors. Penny Bragg, Audio Visuals for today's meeting. Ellen Lee, Acting Chief for Report Development. Monica Mitchell, Report Editor. Jason Zeitler, Vehicle Factors. Bob Squire, Technical Reconstruction. And Dr. Taran Kayagil, Chief Medical Officer from the Office of Research and Engineering. The presentations will begin with an investigation overview by the investigator in charge, Steve Prouty. Mr. Prouty.
Good morning, Chairman Hamidi and members of the board. This morning, staff will be presenting on a crash between a motor coach and 3 truck-tractor semi-trailer combination vehicles parked on the shoulder of an interstate rest area exit ramp. In the early morning hours of July 12, 2023, a Greyhound motor coach was traveling west on Interstate 70 on a scheduled route from Indianapolis, Indiana to St. Louis, Missouri, and was approaching the Silver Lake rest area near Highland, Illinois. The motor coach was occupied by the driver and 20 passengers. The weather in the area was clear and the roadway was dry. Conditions at the time of the crash were dark, with highway lighting on in the vicinity of the rest area. Here is a brief overview of the crash sequence. At about 1:48 a.m. local time on the day of the crash, a 2014 Prevost 50-passenger motor coach operated by Greyhound Lines Incorporated was westbound on I-70 as it approached the Silver Lake rest area, which can be seen further up on the slide. No evidence was found that indicated the motor coach driver intended to stop at the rest area, nor was it a scheduled stop on the route. The posted speed limit for the main travel lanes on the interstate in this area was 70 miles per hour, with an advisory speed of 40 miles per hour posted on the rest area exit ramp. The motor coach, represented here by the light blue arrow, departed the travel lanes of I-70 onto the exit ramp to the rest area, and then onto the right shoulder of the ramp, where it struck the first of 3 truck-tractor semi-trailer combination vehicles parked on the ramp's right shoulder. As shown on the last slide, once on the right shoulder of the ramp, the motor coach struck the left rear of a parked Freightliner vehicle, causing it to move forward and to the right while jackknifing. The motor coach then sideswiped a Kenworth vehicle before striking the rear of a Mack vehicle. The motor coach came to rest with its front right corner in contact with the left rear corner of the Mack vehicle's semi-trailer. This crash scene photograph shows a ground level view of the vehicles at final rest. As a result of the crash, 3 motor coach passengers were fatally injured. The driver and 11 motor coach passengers sustained injuries ranging from minor to serious, and the 3 truck drivers who were inside their vehicles at the time of the crash were uninjured. As a result of our investigation, the NTSB established that the following factors did not cause or contribute to the crash: highway design, markings, lighting, and signage, weather and roadway conditions, the mechanical condition of the motor coach, the motor coach driver's medical qualification, training and experience, cell phone use, or use of alcohol or other drugs. We also excluded a sudden medical event that would have impaired or incapacitated the motor coach driver, and the NTSB found that the emergency response was both timely and adequate. Safety issues identified in this crash include the fatigue state of the motor coach driver, deficient oversight of the driver by Greyhound, federal guidance on safety management, driver coaching, and fatigue mitigation were insufficient. Lack of seatbelt use by nearly all the motor coach passengers, and the lack of available truck parking along the national highway system, which often leads to trucks parking on the shoulders of exit and entrance ramps, thereby increasing the risk of crashes. Parties to the investigation were the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the Illinois State Police, the Illinois Department of Transportation, the Highland Huron Fire Protection District, the City of Highland Fire Department, and Greyhound Lines Incorporated. This slide lists the on-scene and investigative staff involved in the Highland investigation. This slide is a continuation of the staff involved in this investigation. This slide lists the staff who developed the report product for the Highland investigation. This slide lists the staff who produced the virtual board meeting for this investigation. The next presentation will be given by Dr. Raphael Marshall, who will discuss the Motorcoach driver and fatigue management.
Good morning. In this presentation, I'll discuss the Motorcoach driver's background, describe why staff believes he was fatigued, and describe how Greyhound could avoid similar crashes by revising its driver scheduling practices and fatigue management program. The 59-year-old male driver was properly licensed and experienced in operating motor coaches. He held a Class B commercial driver's license and a 1-year medical certificate. He was hired by Greyhound in April of 2018. A month later, he was involved in a fatigue-related crash when his motor coach rear-ended a moving combination vehicle. Evidence suggests that the Highland crash was also fatigue-related. Passengers observed the driver drifting in and out of his travel lane and contacting the highway rumble strips, with a few believing he was falling asleep. As illustrated by the dashed line, after the driver negotiated the wide right-hand curb prior to the rest area, he seemed to continue this trajectory into the exit ramp instead of steering left to stay on I-70, as we believe was his intent. Once on the exit ramp, he drifted onto the shoulder before striking the parked vehicles. There's no evidence that the driver applied his brakes during this whole sequence. This behavior is consistent with a diminished state of alertness. In summary, staff found that the passengers' statements, the failure of the driver to negotiate the roadway geometry, and the crash dynamics point to driver fatigue as the primary cause of this crash. There were several reasons why this driver was fatigued. He had been awake for more than 17 hours before the crash, with 13 of those hours on duty. Prolonged wakefulness can lead to a decline in cognitive and motor functions akin to alcohol intoxication. He had a 4.5-hour layover in Indianapolis, but there's no evidence that he rested in the hotel room provided by Greyhound or in the bus terminal break room. And the driver worked a highly irregular work schedule that likely disrupted his sleep, as I will discuss in the next slide. Finally, the driver had medical conditions such as obstructive sleep apnea and diabetes that increased his risks of fatigue. As an example of his irregular schedule, 3 weeks before the crash, on June 21, the driver started work at 3 a.m. On June 22, he began at 4:30 p.m. On June 23, he began his shift around 10:30 a.m. There was nothing unusual about those 3 days. This figure shows his schedule for the month before the crash. This is a very busy slide, but I want you to focus on when he started work each day. As you can see, he had very little consistency in his work schedule and likely went to bed at different times each day. Research shows that an irregular schedule often leads to trouble sleeping and to sleep deprivation because the schedules don't always align with individual circadian rhythms, which is the internal body clock that promotes wakefulness during the day and sleep during the night. Although Greyhound did have a fatigue management policy and provided training and resources to its drivers to manage fatigue, some aspects were insufficient. For example, Greyhound's driver scheduling practices still allowed for highly variable shifts, and the company lacked policies to manage fatigue for drivers on those shifts. It should be noted that these topics are covered in the North American Fatigue Management Program, which is a free, interactive, and comprehensive web-based training program created to manage the risks of driver fatigue. These are geared not only to drivers, but also to their family, company dispatchers, and safety managers. The Highland crash is one of many motorcoach crashes the NTSB has investigated that have occurred during the period of circadian load when alertness levels are most diminished. Because of the frequency of these crashes, the NTSB recommended in 2012 that the FMCSA incorporate scientifically based fatigue mitigation strategies into the hours of service regulations for passenger carrying drivers who operate during the nighttime window of circadian low. This recommendation was reiterated in 2016 after another deadly motorcoach crash. However, the FMCSA has since responded that they did not intend to implement the recommendation. It is currently classified open, unacceptable response. In summary, staff believes the driver's fatigue state was due to a combination of factors, including his prolonged time awake and decision not to use the Greyhound-provided rest facilities, his irregular work schedule, and Greyhound's fatigue risk management program, which did not sufficiently address irregular work schedules. Staff also found that the driver's medical conditions increased his fatigue risks. Therefore, staff is proposing two recommendations to Greyhound, one to revise its fatigue risk management policy to reflect the North American Fatigue Management Program, and another to revise its scheduling practices to reduce irregular work cycles. Staff is also proposing one recommendation to the American Bus Association and the United Motorcoach Association to inform their members about the circumstances of the Highland crash and urge them to develop fatigue management strategies based on the NAFMP. In addition, staff believes that the federal hours of service regulations must address the risk of operating a bus during the overnight hours when drivers are more prone to fatigue. Therefore, staff is also proposing to reiterate H1230 to the FMCSA. That concludes my presentation. The next presentation will be given by Michael Fox.
Good morning. In this presentation, I will focus on two main topics. The first topic will highlight motor carrier oversight and driver risk management issues. The second topic I will address is the need for federal guidance on proactively using driver monitoring systems that encourages motor carriers to provide coaching and implement policies to maximize their effectiveness. The carrier involved in this crash was identified as Greyhound Lines Incorporated. Greyhound first began operations in 1914. In 2013, Greyhound installed driver monitoring systems on its fleet. These systems can alert the motor carrier to risky driver behaviors so that coaching or discipline can be provided. October 2021, Flix, a Germany-based transportation company, acquired Greyhound. The acquisition included the motor coaches, the equipment, and the routes, but did not include the terminals. Starting in 2021, those terminals were systematically closed and then sold. As a result, some of the crash-involved driver files were lost. Greyhound is the largest fixed-route bus company in the United States. At the time of the crash, Greyhound operated 1,023 motor coaches, employed 1,054 drivers, and operated 592 fixed routes in the United States. Greyhound maintained paper records for formal disciplinary actions. Investigators discovered that the driver's personnel file had an extensive disciplinary history. For example, from February of 2019 to October 2021, there were 13 written reprimands. Investigators discovered that a previous crash that took place in 2018, as well as other reprimands, were missing. Additionally, the driver was on the top 20 list, which is a monthly list of drivers that generated the highest driver monitoring violations. We'll talk about those violations shortly. Overall, investigators determined determined that his official Greyhound record was incomplete and missing entries. Investigators discovered that the driver had been reprimanded 9 times for speeding. Of note, in March of 2019, the driver was reprimanded for going 77 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone, a violation of company policy. On the written reprimand, the supervisor stated, "You are hereby cautioned that future occurrences of this nature will result in progressive discipline up to and including termination." As you can see, the driver refused to sign the reprimand. The driver, however, received 7 more reprimands for speeding and was not suspended or terminated, and the driver's risky behavior continued. Progressive discipline provides a framework for handling employee problems for negative behavior, such as poor performance or violation of company policies. Industry best practices for progressive discipline include verbal warning and counseling, written warning, suspension, and termination. The fragmented and incomplete personnel records made Greyhound's oversight of the driver unnecessarily difficult and contributed to the lack of disciplinary actions. Had Greyhound implemented a progressive disciplinary policy, the company could have addressed the driver's unsafe behavior before the crash. Therefore, staff is proposing a recommendation to Greyhound to create an electronic personnel file management system to ensure that all driver records, including disciplinary action, are easily accessible to terminal managers and safety personnel. The crash involved Motorcoach, as well as the rest of the Greyhound fleet, was equipped with a driver monitoring system, or DMS, as shown in the orange circle. The system features an inward and outward facing camera that identifies risky behavior such as speeding, following too closely, or cell phone use. Greyhound had policies prohibiting tampering with the DMS camera, but did not have any policies to improve driver behavior, such as driver coaching or thresholds for the number of DMS events allowed. Investigators discovered that from July of 2022 to July of 2023, the year leading up to the crash, the driver had 71 DMS events. Greyhound was not using its DMS to its full potential for driver oversight. Furthermore, Greyhound lacked a policy to remove drivers who repeatedly violated company safety policies. Therefore, staff is proposing to Greyhound to incorporate DMS events into safety and policies, including detection and prevention of fatigue driving, allowable number of critical safety violations a driver can have in a specific time frame, and procedures to hold poorly performing drivers accountable, to include coaching and disciplinary action. Although Greyhound had invested in DMS to monitor driver behaviors, the company lacked a clear policy for proactive coaching and other measures to maximize the system's effectiveness. In a previous NTSB investigation that took place after a January 2020 crash in Mount Pleasant Township, Pennsylvania, the NTSB issued safety recommendation H224 to the FMCSA to provide guidance for motor carriers to proactively use DMS information to aid in driver training and ensure driver compliance with the regulations, currently classified open acceptable response. The FMCSA has included coaching as a part of a multi-year contract to develop outreach materials. However, given the known benefits of coaching and driver feedback, the delay is unnecessary. This crash investigation highlights the need for federal guidance on DMS. Federal guidance on proactively using DMS to provide driver coaching can encourage motor carriers to implement effective policies that reduce unsafe driver behaviors that can lead to a crash. Therefore, staff is proposing reiterating safety recommendation H224 to the FMCSA and classifies the recommendation open unacceptable response. Greyhound could use various strategies to correct its deficient safety policies. One strategy might include the application of the FMCSA Safety Management Cycle, or SMC. The SMC, or Safety Management Cycle, is a tool used by FMCSA to help identify and address safety and compliance issues during compliance reviews. As shown on the graphic, the Safety Management Cycle consists of 6 elements. The Safety Management Cycle could also be used during a change of ownership or after implementation of new safety technologies. Investigators determined that a proactive approach to the SMC for all safety policies would allow Greyhound to address deficiencies beyond compliance with the federal regulations. Therefore, staff is proposing a recommendation to the FMCSA to provide guidance through a passenger carrier safety publication on its website that encourages motor carriers to implement the safety management cycle when there's new ownership or when implementing new safety policies or technologies. Greyhound could also take the initiative to implement safe processes and address the deficiencies described in this report. Therefore, staff is proposing a recommendation to Greyhound to establish a written policy to incorporate safety management cycle processes beyond their use in compliance reviews, such as when new safety policy or new safety technology is adopted. This concludes my presentation. Mr. Ronald Kaminsky will be making the next presentation.
Good morning. In this presentation, I'll discuss the Motorcoach occupant injuries and lack of seatbelt use in the crash. Then I will discuss the lack of pre-trip safety briefing for the crash trip and Greyhound's lack of written policy for pre-trip briefings. Shown in the photo on the left is the crash damage to the front and right side of the Greyhound Motorcoach, including intrusion into the passenger compartment that extended over 24 feet down the right side. The photo on the right is taken from inside the Motorcoach, looking from rear to front and showing the damage with the first 6 rows of seats being sheared away at the base of the frames during the collision sequence. Each seat was equipped with a lap and shoulder belt for use by passengers. The Motorcoach was occupied by 20 passengers and the driver. 3 passengers sustained fatal injuries. These 3 passengers were seated in the intrusion zone at the window seats. 1 fatally injured passenger was restrained by the lap shoulder belt. There were 7 seriously injured passengers. 3 of the seriously injured were unbelted and seated outside of the intrusion zone. The other 4 passengers were unbelted and seated in the intrusion zone. The remaining 10 passengers sustained minor to no injuries. The Motorcoach driver was restrained and sustained minor injuries. The NTSB has found in previous Motorcoach crashes that the use of lap shoulder belts help reduce injuries sustained by occupants. Had the Motorcoach driver conducted a pre-trip safety briefing, he would have been able to inform the passengers that both Indiana and Illinois have a primary seatbelt enforcement law and requires bus passengers to be restrained. Pre-trip safety briefings help increase seatbelt usage by informing and educating passengers about the onboard safety features of the Motorcoach, such as the available lap shoulder belts and the emergency equipment and exit windows. Passengers reported that the Greyhound driver did not conduct a pre-trip safety briefing prior to departing Indianapolis before the crash. According to Greyhound's Director of Safety and Security, drivers are supposed to deliver a safety briefing using their cell phones with a recorded message or do it verbally each time there is a change of driver, at large terminals, and when picking up passengers en route. If the driver is picking up passengers late at night and most passengers are asleep, the driver may choose not to do a pre-trip briefing. However, Greyhound was unable to provide a written policy to document that this was the company's guidance to their drivers. In summary, had the seriously injured passenger seated outside the intrusion zone been wearing the available lap and shoulder belts, their injuries would have been reduced. Staff found that had the Motorcoach driver conducted a pre-trip safety briefing to the passengers when they departed Indianapolis, informing them of the availability of the seatbelts and the legal requirement to wear them in both Indiana and Illinois, passengers might have been more likely to wear their seatbelts. Staff proposes a recommendation to Greyhound to establish written policies to require pre-trip safety briefings every time there is a change of driver at every terminal before departure, regardless of departure time, and every time the Motorcoach takes on new passengers. Thank you. This concludes my presentation. Mr. Dan Walsh will be presenting on highway factors.
Good morning. As you recall from the previous presentations, the Greyhound Motorcoach drifted outside of its lane onto the shoulder of the exit ramp to the Silver Lake rest area. This presentation focuses on why combination vehicles routinely park on the shoulder due to the lack of available parking. I will also be discussing that lack of access to long-term parking spaces persists for commercial vehicles, and truck parking information management systems can improve truck parking access. Finally, I will be discussing that a centralized effort is needed to address the safety risk caused by the lack of truck parking. Interstate 70, or I-70, was a 4-lane divided interstate as shown in the figure to the right. Approximately 8,800 multi-unit trucks travel every day on I-70, comprising 37% of the traffic stream. The Silver Lake rest area contained a one-way westbound exit ramp and entrance ramp in which truck drivers must decide whether to drive through the rest area to find a parking space or continue to the next rest stop. As shown in the figure to the right, the Silver Lake rest area was limited to 21 truck parking spaces. A 2018 Illinois Department of Transportation rest area study categorized the rest area at 100 to 150% utilization, meaning there was consistently not enough spaces for trucks to park. If a truck driver was not able to find a parking space at the rest area, the next public rest stop on westbound I-70 was located 76 miles away. As shown in the photograph to the right, NTSB investigators found combination vehicles parked on the same westbound shoulder when observing the rest area on July 15, 2023, 3 days after the crash. These vehicles were located within the highway clear zone, which is the 30-foot wide area beyond the edge of the travelway for the recovery of errant vehicles. This photograph illustrates the dangers of trucks parked on the shoulder, leaving no room for recovery of vehicles who drift from the travel lanes, as evident in this crash. Staff found that combination vehicles were unsafely parked in the highway clear zone, decreasing the Greyhound driver's ability to stop or return the vehicle to the roadway. In addition, we found that combination vehicles routinely park on the Silver Lake rest area exit ramp shoulder because of limited truck parking, which increases the risk of a collision from an errant vehicle. The lack of truck parking has been a long-standing issue, and in 2012, Jason's Law was established to address the shortage of long-term parking for commercial motor vehicles. One of the requirements under Jason's Law was for the DOT to conduct a survey and comparative assessment to evaluate the capability of each state to provide adequate parking and rest facilities for commercial vehicles. The initial study, conducted in 2015 and updated in 2020, revealed 36 of 50 states reported problems with commercial truck parking, including Illinois. While 88% of the spots are private, Jason's Law surveys suggest specifically that public truck parking spaces have not kept up with the increased volume of truck traffic. Staff found that limited truck parking and subsequent unsafe parking observed at the Silver Lake rest area is consistent with a lack of access to long-term truck parking spaces for combination vehicles on the national highway system, as reported by Jason's Law surveys. Truck parking information management systems, or TPIMs, are integrated into parking infrastructure to determine near real-time availability of truck parking and disseminate that information to drivers. The primary method for dissemination is using variable message signs, as shown in the figure to the right. Steps have been taken by several states such as North Carolina, Illinois, and Oregon to implement TPIMs that include removing parking restrictions and implementing regional systems. Staff found that continued deployment of TPIM systems can improve access to truck parking and allow for targeted expansion of access and usage. In addition, we found although state efforts to improve truck parking information and capacity are positive, a centralized effort can more broadly address the safety risk caused by lack of available truck parking nationwide. Therefore, staff is proposing a recommendation to the U.S. Department of Transportation to expand efforts to use TPIMs to identify rest areas in critical need of additional truck parking. Although TPIMs is necessary to access information, it should be used in conjunction with truck parking capacity expansion. Federal efforts have been made to introduce bills such as H.R. 1659, the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act. However, those efforts have not passed. Expanding federal grant programs to allow flexibility for funds to be spent for operating and maintaining truck parking facilities may help individual states or localities that are struggling to find ways to provide the needed operations for those facilities. In addition, exploring ways to eliminate the prohibition against private development of rest areas could lead to a public-private partnership to fund maintenance and operation costs. Staff found that truck parking shortages require solutions that increase parking capacity as well as information about parking availability along the nation's highway system. Therefore, staff is proposing a recommendation to the U.S. Department of Transportation to pursue available options to increase commercial vehicle parking capacity on highways. The U.S. DOT and several stakeholder organizations established a public-private partnership, the National Coalition on Truck Parking, in August 2015 as a response to a documented need for truck parking solutions. Coalition stakeholders represent the U.S. DOT, AASHTO, and trucking industry organizations. Since the coalition is managed by the U.S. DOT, staff is proposing a recommendation to the coalition to publish an updated report that proposes solutions to truck parking capacity shortages. This concludes staff's presentations, and we would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you, Mr. Prouty, Dr. Marshall, Mr. Fox, Mr. Kaminsky, and Mr. Walsh for all of your excellent presentations. I do want to invite board members. There's only 3 of us today. If you want to turn on your camera, we can have it on for the duration of the time for question rounds and also deliberation. So for question rounds, we, for the public, we focus on major safety issues we identified in the investigation for our questions. So in the first round, we'll discuss Motorcoach driver fatigue, as well as Greyhound fatigue management and fatigue mitigation. In the second round of questions, we're going to cover deficient oversight of the Motorcoach driver, driver monitoring systems, Greyhound's record keeping, safety management, and seatbelt use. And the final topic will be limited availability of truck parking. Before we consider the draft findings, we'll also entertain a final round of questions on any other safety issue that board members would like to raise. And the purpose of this part of the discussion and focused deliberation is to highlight the areas where we believe we can make the biggest difference to improve safety. So we'll begin the discussion with Motorcoach driver fatigue and Greyhound fatigue management and fatigue mitigation. Again, if board members want to turn on the camera, we'll start with Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the staff and commend them on the great work in their investigation and the draft report. And I appreciate everybody's flexibility of moving to a virtual environment to make this happen today. Regarding the effects of the driver's variable work rest schedule, the language in the report is actually quite chilling. I want to quote that here. The likely result of this work-rest variability was constant lack of synchronization between the driver's work hours and his normal circadian rhythm, making him constantly at risk to the effects of fatigue while on duty, end quote. Constantly at risk. That sounds like an accident waiting to happen, and it was. We know that Greyhound had made changes required to close a safety recommendation all the way back to 2000 that we had made to them, and we closed it acceptable. And then there was this catastrophic backsliding. Staff, to your knowledge, have we seen recidivism like this before, where a company has reverted to unsafe practices after our recommendations were closed as acceptable?
Member Graham, thank you for the question. That's a great question. We have not seen this in other crash investigations where we issued safety recommendation, then we saw some backsliding. But to your point, the burnt cabins investigation in 1998, we issued recommendations to Greyhound to improve their fatigue management. And as a result, they hired Dr. Mark Rosekind, who actually was a board member from Sleep Solutions, and he completely retooled their program, which included driver training. They re-engineered their routes so that it would incorporate hours of service. And they also established some new policies that would include commute time. Additionally, they also provided for paid hotel rooms when drivers had layovers, and also did OSA training, and they still do OSA screening. So they did successfully complete the recommendation, and that's why we closed the recommendation. However, in this investigation, we clearly see that Greyhound did revert back to that inverted sleep schedule, which was causal in this crash. And that is why staff is proposing a recommendation to Greyhound to implement a fatigue management program modeled after the North American Fatigue Management Program.
Excellent, thank you. Do we know how prevalent is variable scheduling across the commercial driving industry as a whole?
What we know is that Greyhound does have it's the largest scheduled bus line, and for them it's a 24/7 operation. So it's very important for them to look at fatigue as an issue. And from what we know, they only really looked at hours of service regulations. They didn't really look into how their schedules can cause driver fatigue. As we know, trucking and bus operations work 24/7. So we believe that this is an issue throughout the industry. And so we are proposing a recommendation that UMA and ABA also look into ways to decrease driver fatigue through fatigue management programs.
Okay, excellent. I do have a couple more questions, but I think I'll wait till the next round on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Member Graham. Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. In the staff presentation, there was mention of the irregular work schedule, and Member Graham just discussed that as well. I just want to kind of go back over some of the times that we saw on the chart. During the successive days that leading up to the accident, I think the driver's schedule had him starting one day in the early morning hours, 2:45 a.m., I think, if I'm reading the chart correctly. Then the next day, 4:15 p.m., almost the reverse in terms of daytime, nighttime schedule. Then followed by 10:45 a.m., mid-morning start, and then a 9:15 a.m. start, and then finally, again, flipping the schedule, 12:45 p.m., very late in the evening, before then having a day off. Is there any realistic way for a driver's sleep pattern to adjust to that kind of a schedule?
There really isn't. And so we've asked, we understand that Greyhound has to operate 24/7. However, there are ways for them to make it easier for drivers to to get sleep, to get restorative sleep. It's easier, it would also be very helpful for them to actually really look at their scheduling and see if there's a way that they can reduce the irregularity and the variability in their schedules. As I mentioned, they really only looked at hours of service. There's so many things that they could have done. And one of them is maybe to use an assessment tool, a fatigue assessment tool, such as FAST or CAS or FADE, to really look at their schedules and determine where there is a fatigue risk and change it in a way that would actually reduce the amount of fatigue risk for drivers. And so we've made we proposed a recommendation for them to look at their scheduling practices to reduce these variabilities.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I have to say I was very surprised by this, and some of it is because my own background coming from the airline industry, or at least an extensive period of my career in the airline industry. I actually did a fair amount of work in connection with airline industry practices on flight and duty time. And I'm not suggesting that airline practices are perfect. They're not. But you don't see this kind of variable scheduling in the airline industry. And it's because there's a very keen understanding of the dangers of that. And I would hope we would see I would hope we would see some significant work done to try to address that by Greyhound and any others in the industry that have these sorts of practices. The motor coach driver was clearly not afforded routine sleep opportunities by Greyhound scheduling practices, and he was often scheduled during a period of circadian low. And in addition to that, he had some other medical conditions, including sleep apnea, and that was treated by a CPAP machine. I think it's encouraging that screening for sleep apnea is being done and that proper treatment is being afforded. But again, this complicates the situation for a driver. I mean, how much do these medical conditions complicate a driver's ability to adjust to that sort of odd schedule?
I think Dr. Cahill could answer that question.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. So the driver did have a number of medical conditions that increased his fatigue risk in general, although we weren't able to determine the contributions of those conditions to his fatigue in this event. For example, he had obstructive sleep apnea, which he was treating with the CPAP device. That CPAP device was being used to an extent that was borderline adherent in the days before the crash, but particularly in the couple of days that he used it most recently to the crash, it was being used more effectively. He also had a history of diabetes, but we had no indication that condition was out of control. Actually, the last time it was assessed a couple months before the crash, it was well controlled. So he had these conditions, but as you point out, this medical risk, even if we can't say what its contribution in this crash is, does make this discussion of scheduling effectively and effective fatigue management even more relevant, because individuals with these risk factors are out there, they're working, and any effective sleep, any restful sleep that they can get is going to be beneficial for their performance.
Thank you. Chair, I have some additional questions. I'll hold on to those.
Thank you very much, Member Chapman. Just a question. I'm wondering, and I'm just going to read through this very quickly, but if Mike or Tehran, if you can talk generally about how Greyhound's training compares to other carriers, motor coach companies, or either other commercial motor vehicle companies. I'll note that in our draft report, it states that the first phase of training consists of 10 hours of computer-based training, which covers topics, from basics of safe driving to adverse weather, navigating intersections, pedestrian awareness. Included in the training is instruction on fatigue management. The second phase consists of at least 40 hours of behind-the-wheel time and 13 days of classroom training, which covers a number of topics, including USDOT regulations and completing logs. The final training phase consists of at least 70 additional hours of behind the wheel time and 10 hours of computer-based training on topics such as substance abuse and hazard communication. And each training phase ends with a proficiency test, and they have to score at least 70% accuracy to pass. I'm wondering how that our previous board meetings on motor coach companies and even commercial motor vehicle companies, and my previous work before I came to the NTSB on motor coaches, this is a much more robust training program than we see in many operations. So, you know, I do want to recognize, in addition to this training, that they are doing obstructive sleep apnea screening and diagnosis and tracking, or should be tracking that, because a lot of industries don't. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chair. That's a great question. And yes, to their credit, Greyhound has a robust safety program. They have a lot of good components of a safety culture that includes probably one of the best, in my opinion, training programs in the nation. I've been to probably 1,000 motor carriers in my career, both in trucking and in motor coach arena, and their training program has to be one of the best as far as most extensive. It covers a wide array of training modules, and it's the longest training program, I believe, in the nation as far as training their drivers behind the wheel, classroom, combination of both. So it is very stellar. However, in this crash, as we've identified, there were some weaknesses that we identified, and they can definitely take some of our recommendations to strengthen their program.
And do you believe the sale of the company may have led to some of their going back to previous scheduling practices, or do you attribute that to something else, or just sort of complacency and changes over time, or?
Yes, thank you for the question. I would say it's a combination of both. Certainly, the change of ownership in October of 2021, when the company was bought out by Flix. In our conversations with Greyhound officials, there was tremendous turmoil. There was a lot of, they re-engineered the company. There was a lot of staff that was let go. Their corporate office in Dallas, Texas has been eliminated. So they did a lot of restructuring, and that may have caused some things to fall through the cracks. We know that that was contributory to the drivers' personnel records that were lost because they physically lost their terminals, and we'll talk about that in the next session. But yes, I would say that the transformation of the company being bought out did contribute to some of these issues that we're identifying in this investigation.
And just really quickly, in my last couple of seconds, we did a study about 30 years ago, and the study found for the subset of accidents for which sleep data were available, what percentage of drivers with irregular schedules were involved, like this, irregular schedules were involved in fatigue-related accidents?
I believe the number is 67%, Chair.
Yeah, 67% compared to about 38% of drivers with regular schedules. So thank you very much. I'm now going to call back on Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to pick up on the CPAP discussion, if you don't mind. It's reported here that we found out the driver uses CPAP for at least 4 hours on 60% of the nights before the crash. Although it was advisory only, in 2016, FMCSA, their Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee, and the Medical Review Board jointly recommended that CPAP usage of at least 4 hours per night on 70% of the nights be considered a minimum threshold for adequate adherence to treatment. Additionally, Greyhound's internal policy was that for drivers with OSA, all CPAP compliance reports must be at a minimum of 70% before medical cards can be issued. Do we know if FMCSA is considered making the 70% threshold mandatory?
So FMCSA did previously, in 2016, have a notice of proposed rulemaking jointly with the Federal Railroad Administration, looking at establishing standards for obstructive sleep apnea, but that was subsequently withdrawn.
And then talked a little bit about the minimum compliance for medical cards from Greyhound. Does Greyhound audit the CPAP compliance or otherwise enforce their policy?
Yes, it's in their policy to actually, in fact, for drivers who obtain their CPAP through Greyhound, Greyhound would pay for the CPAP, but one of the agreements is that these drivers would have to have their CPAP usage monitored by Greyhound. And if they fall below 70%, Greyhound is supposed to contact them and determine why this is. I don't know how often they do this, and from historically for this driver, it appears that he did use his CPAP majority of the time, over 70% of the time. I'm not really sure if Greyhound had contacted this driver since he had been using it a little bit lower prior to the crash. But yeah, it's in their policy for them to actually monitor their drivers and contact them if they use it below that 70%.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to see that we are allowing CPAP usage for things like this. And if they have a policy, it would be advisable them to hold everybody accountable to it. So thank you very much for this. And that's all I have in this section, Chair.
Thank you, Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just describe generally for us? There was mention in the staff presentation, but could you describe generally the impact that fatigue has on a person cognitively, and also what the physical effects of fatigue can be?
Yeah. So just to give you a background, so fatigue is considered a lapse of attention or alertness. And also it causes degradation in performance. It's been shown to cause degradation in psychomotor vigilance tests. We've seen it several times in our crashes, such as the Burnt Cabins crash, where that person had lost alertness and crashed into a truck that was parked on the side of the road. We see this all the time. We've had at least 10 motorcoach crashes since 1998 that have caused 68 fatalities, and these are all due to fatigue.
And just sort of to put it in kind of plain English, to help people understand this, essentially the impacts of significant fatigue are equivalent to alcohol impairment, driving drunk.
That's what's been found.
Yeah,
that's
thank
correct.
you. Can I ask, please, for just a kind of an overview of how FMCSA's hours of service rules for motorcoach drivers are structured?
Yeah.
What are those rules, and why are they so important for managing fatigue?
So motorcoach drivers are limited to 10 hours of driving and 15 hours of duty each day. And when you consider it, 10 hours of driving for a motorcoach driver, it could be at any time of day. And 15 hours of on duty is quite a lot when you consider that time awake is one of the factors that causes fatigue. So when you consider for this driver, he could drive 15 hours, and then he's also got a commute time. And so, you know, if you really add all of these up, they're in high risk of fatigue.
And so when you see this kind of flipping of the schedule, it becomes clear, I think, and this is one of the conclusions in our report, that it's not enough to just comply with the hours of service rules.
That's very correct. And we see motorcoach drivers all the time driving during the low period of circadian rhythm when they feel fatigued, just because We are diurnal people. We usually are active during the day and want to sleep at night. And yet these drivers have to drive during a circadian low. So in those cases, maybe 10 hours is way too much driving. So we've actually made a recommendation to the FMCSA to look into scientifically based strategies to mitigate fatigue among motor coach drivers because of this issue.
And that's a recommendation we made in 2012, and we're
That's correct.
reiterating that again today, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's all I have in this section. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks, Member Chapman. And just really quickly, was it mentioned that there was no evidence the driver rested in the break room or at all during travel? What is the responsibility there?
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
yeah, you're absolutely correct. Greyhound incentivized drivers to rest by providing hotel rooms for them and actually even transportation to those hotel rooms. This driver did not use that. It appears, based on the evidence that we have, that he didn't check into the hotel room, and based on video evidence, he did not use the terminal break room. And based also on CPAP records, he did not use his CPAP during this time. So we're pretty sure that he did not rest during this period of time. Now, it's possible that he just felt like he had been, that he was pretty wide awake at this point. However, he did have a responsibility to realize that he'd be driving overnight. And we feel that, he did have a responsibility. However, we also feel that Greyhound has a responsibility to schedule their drivers in a way that would take into account the risks of fatigue, and maybe they could have also made their training a little bit more comprehensive so the drivers would realize this.
Yeah. Well, in their training, they do have fatigue management training, but I do think it's important that while we're talking about Greyhound, which has a significant responsibility to ensure driver safety and public safety on our roadways, that we also point out that for whether it's hours, you could have the best hours of service regulations out there, but if you're not using your rest time to actually rest, that's a problem as well. And we've seen that whether it's in highway crashes or rail accidents, pipeline explosions, we've seen it everywhere. And so I just want to point that out, especially since this driver had been involved in another fatigue-related crash earlier. Okay, I think we are done with this round of questioning, and we're going to move on to the second round, where we'll cover deficient oversight of the motor coach driver monitoring systems, Greyhound's record keeping, safety management, and seatbelt use. Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. You did point out that the motor coach seats were all equipped with working lap and shoulder belts. I want to talk about the 3 unrestrained passengers that were seated outside the intrusion zone that suffered serious injuries. Can you repeat what you said from the presentation as far as what we think if they had been seatbelted in, what do we believe their injuries would have been?
Well, all 3 of them were out of the intrusion zone, and all of them, one had a chest injury, another one had a broken eye socket, and the other one had a neck fracture, a minor neck fracture. Well, it's a neck fracture. So had they been belted, they would have prevented them from hitting the seats in front of them and keeping in place and preventing those injuries. So, and that's why we're making this recommendation. We need to have these pre-trip safety briefings for these people to be aware that their seatbelts, and especially when they're traveling through states that have a primary seatbelt law, they need to be warned.
Yeah. So,
to support Mr. Kaminski's statement, we had a passenger who reported to ISP based on the driver driving behavior, that he put his seatbelt on and only had injuries consistent with seatbelt use as part of that. So that also is where we're going with that statement.
Absolutely. We know seatbelts work. We've known for years, and yet time and time again, we see people not wearing seatbelts or passengers not wearing seatbelts, even in passenger cars. And we know they work. I just can't believe we still have this problem of people not wanting to wear seatbelts, even on a motor coach. You did talk about primary enforcement laws. Illinois had a primary enforcement law for seatbelt uses on motor coaches. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do we know how many other states have primary enforcement laws for motor coaches?
Yes, there's 9 other states that have primary enforcement laws.
Okay, and when you say primary enforcement, what does that mean?
That means that if a police officer can pull somebody over if they see that they're not wearing a seatbelt.
Would that be difficult in a motor coach?
That would be very challenging, yes, sir.
Are you aware of any states that do that on a regular basis for a motor coach?
No, sir, I do not.
I don't know of any either. Talked a little bit about the
Member Graham, if I can
Yes,
add to
please.
Mr. Kaminsky's answers, we have heard of certain circumstances where police will be in another motor coach and will be able to observe in a similar motor coach seatbelt use or not. But as he mentioned, it is uncommon. One of the aspects about a primary enforcement law is that it also serves for education purposes, so that passengers know that they're required to. Of course, we agree with you. Passengers, when there's a seat is equipped with seatbelts, they should wear them and wear them properly every time. But we also know that state laws can further encourage people to do the right thing and what we think is safest. And so that's, of course, one of the aspects for primary enforcement for all seating positions is to reinforce the need to wear seatbelts at all times.
Absolutely, agree completely. All right, I will come back with some more questions in the next round. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. The draft report indicates that according to passenger interviews, the motor coach driver drifted out of the travel lane several times over the trip prior to the crash. Passengers also said they were awakened by the driver overrunning rumble strips. One passenger woke up and put their seatbelt on about 10 minutes before the crash, in part because of these observed behaviors. Another passenger stated that the driver was falling asleep and drifting out of the lane about an hour before the crash. What should passengers do if they are traveling by bus and they experience or observe concerning behavior by a driver?
We've talked about this, and I think the best thing would be you can call 911 and report it. That would probably be the quickest way to get a response for police to pull over the driver.
Thank you.
I'd also like to add that the Greyhound has a number 1-800 Safe Bus that passengers can call. They've had this number since the 90s.
And is that displayed on board the bus?
It's not, but it's on their website, and it's
So
also on the bus itself.
You say it is on board the bus?
It's on. Well, it's in the exterior of the bus.
Exterior. Okay. So if you're a passenger on board a bus late at night, you're probably not going to be aware of that. I mean, I suppose you might Google it or something, but certainly 911. We all know the purpose of 911. And I think one of the things we want to do is encourage passengers to take action, take proactive action, and call 911. I mean, it's the right thing to do in terms of your safety and your fellow passengers. During the investigation, it was found that Greyhound's official record on the motor coach driver was incomplete. Greyhound stated that the driver received a written reprimand after a crash in 2018 where he rear-ended a truck, but the company couldn't locate a copy of that document. I think we all find that very concerning. why was Greyhound's record keeping so inadequate?
Thank you for the question, Member Chapman. And I would like to have Mr. Bragg bring up the Greyhound driver record. We have a slide that we can use as a talking point here. So this is a copy of the driver's official record. It starts when the driver first begins as a driver, and it goes throughout his entire career. Investigators found that there were only 3 entries on this official record. However, in his personnel file, we found 13 written reprimands for various offenses. 9 of them were for speeding. 9 of the records were for speeding. So there was a disconnect from the records that we had physical reprimands for, and then the 3 records or the 3 infractions that were put onto this HR02 form. We did not have the written reprimands for these documented infractions. In fact, there was no further documentation for this official record after February of 2019. As you can see, that's the last entry. However, we subpoenaed the records for the drive cam event for the year leading up to the crash, and the driver had 71 drive cam infractions, and 7 of them were scored 10 out of 10, and obviously, those infractions were not documented on this HR02 form. It's very troubling why these records were missing. We don't know why. According to Greyhound officials, they said that the physical records were lost during the transition when the terminals were sold, and then they relocated to new terminals. And to that point, we have a solution to this problem. Or issue area, and that is that staff is proposing a recommendation to Greyhound to create an electronic file system so that will include disciplinary records that can be reviewed by terminal managers and corporate safety personnel.
Thank you. But there was a litany of warning signs with this driver, and they were all missed, and that, or most of them were missed at least. That seems to be directly related to the lack of an electronic record system. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And I'm sorry, I'm a little bit over here, but is this one of the areas where we made a previous recommendation? Greyhound indicated that they had satisfied that recommendation. We closed it, and then there was some backsliding here.
Correct. Yes. In the San Jose investigation, we issued a very similar recommendation that they create an electronic file system. And they gave us, we visited them in July of 2021, and they provided evidence that they had created an electronic file system for their driver qualification files, and they were in the process of converting their personnel files over to an electronic format. We had enough confidence that they would complete that recommendation, and it was closed. And then in October of 2021, they were purchased by Flex, and then that's when there was all this upsetment and records were lost.
Yeah, that's very concerning. Chair, apologies for going over. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to keep you on here, Mr. Fox, because I'll just put an exclamation on point on that. The list of driver infractions, which we have a list and a table in our docket and certainly in the report, of 20 different infractions from 2018 through 2021, from speeding, 77 miles an hour, 78 miles an hour, repeatedly. And then you mentioned the drive cam, which we pulled those records for the last year. And over the last year, the drive cam events recorded for this particular driver: rolling stops, 20 events, following distance, which looks like less than 2 seconds, 16 events, speeding, 12 events, braking, 7 events, critical distance, 3 events. And then you mentioned in your presentation that the driver was on the top 20 list of highest violations. Top 20 drivers?
He was on the list of drivers that generated the most violations from the drive cam.
So
he was on
the
bad list, the bad boy list.
So I just, if you're a company and you have a bad boy list, if you have a list of, hey, you should not be on the list of highest violations and you're in the top 20, if you were a company, it would seem to me that you would be monitoring your drive cam and monitoring the actions of at least your top 20, if not more, to ensure that that driver is conducting safe operating practices on the road. Did Greyhound say why they weren't doing any of that, or?
Well, as you saw in the slide presentation, that they were writing the driver up to a point, saying, if you do it again, you're going to be terminated. But there was no teeth in that written reprimand. They didn't have any horsepower behind it. And to that point, that's why staff is proposing this recommendation to Greyhound that they incorporate DMS events into their safety and disciplinary actions, so that Greyhound establishes a threshold for so many events that can happen in a quarter or in a month. And when a driver exceeds that threshold, that there are repercussions. The driver will be held accountable.
Yeah, and progressive disciplinary action. So it's not just the same thing or the bare minimum, but over time it increases over time if you continually violate regulations or conduct unsafe operating practices for the company. And I always ask this, I know the answer, but for the public, you are going to book a trip on Greyhound or for any other motor coach. How is there an easy way for just a person not like us involved in transportation every day to look at the safety record of Greyhound and specific drivers?
Yes, ma'am. FMCSA has a website, Safer Bus, that you can go to, and you can, it's publicly available information that shows Greyhound's safety record. And may add, as a whole, Greyhound is a safe company. They have very low crash rate, and they have a lot of good things in place, and we want them to be successful for the next 100 years. I, for one, was a soldier that it took me to my basic training, and took me, when I last finished when I left the Army, they brought me back home. So we want them to continue to be a transportation company for the public. And we know that they will embrace these recommendations and continue to be successful for the next 100 years.
They definitely go above and beyond in areas. Obviously, we see some deficiencies here that, hopefully Greyhound will take our recommendations and implement those, but they definitely go above and beyond in many areas. Just really quick on Safer Bus, can you look up driver history for specific drivers?
No, ma'am. You can just look up general statistics.
Yeah. Okay, great. Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go back to, we talked a little bit about the 2016 Greyhound crash in San Jose, California, where we issued safety recommendation H17-12 to Greyhound. Provide pre-trip safety briefings at all stops prior to departure when taking on new passengers, which describes the use of the emergency exits and the benefits of wearing seatbelts. We had classified that closed acceptable action in December of 2021, based on Greyhound's statement that it had provided all drivers with a pre-recorded announcement in English and Spanish that could be played on the Motorcoach's public address system using the driver's company-issued cell phones. Greyhound also stated that the announcement was to be played at all major stops and pickup locations along the route. The Highland investigation showed that Greyhound subsequently changed its policy on pre-trip safety briefings. Was this investigation able to determine why?
Good question. Thank you. I kind of lost my thought here for a second. We made their recommendation. They ended up, again, it may have been because they changed they got bought out by Flix, but they've suddenly changed to just doing it at large terminals and driver changes, but they weren't doing it on pickups along the way. Now, this specific trip was an express trip, so they weren't doing any pickups along the way. But through our investigation, we found out that they were no longer, even on other trips where they were making stops along the way, depending on the time of day or night, they may or may not have done the pre-trip safety briefing. It was kind of up to the driver's discretion. If it was at night and there's people sleeping, and he wouldn't play the tape or do it verbally.
Okay, but at the beginning of a trip, they should have done this on the express from Indianapolis, correct?
Exactly, especially when you're going through Indiana, Illinois with the primary seatbelt laws.
Yeah, but yet it was not done in this case. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, so they're supposed to be done when they leave a large terminal.
Any terminal. We want
any terminal.
Yes.
Okay. How about when they change drivers? Yes,
and change drivers as well. Anytime there's a driver change.
Okay. And then you said at late night, they don't have to do it at late night?
It's up to the driver discretion. If he feels that there's people sleeping, and it's up to his discretion.
Which is really kind of unfortunate, because if they're traversing a state that has a primary enforcement law for seatbelts, the passenger may be completely unaware that they're in violation of state law.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. In that case, if they got pulled over, who would be cited? The driver, the company, or the passenger for not wearing the seatbelt? Do we know?
Oh, I can't answer that one.
I just thought of that, honestly. I see somebody on.
So based on my my law enforcement experience, ultimately it would be the passengers that would be receiving those citations.
Okay. Okay, excellent. I mean, that's good to know for a passenger, I would think. And I got one more question here. Do the current commercial motor vehicle 8 hours of service regulations for Motorcoach and bus drivers, I think you talked about this, do they incorporate scientifically based fatigue management strategies for drivers who operate at nighttime when your circadian rhythm is low?
No, sir, they don't.
They don't. And have we made recommendations on that in the past?
Yes, sir, we have. Dr. Marshall can elaborate on that. Your microphone.
Sorry, Member Graham, would you please repeat the question to me?
Yeah, have we made recommendations about the Motorcoach and bus drivers fatigue management to be scientifically based mitigations for drivers that are driving during circadian rhythm lows?
Yes, we have. That's H1230. We made that in 2012.
Do you know what that classification of that recommendation is?
Yes, it's classified open unacceptable action at the moment.
It's been out there for 13 years now. Unacceptable. Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have in this section.
Thank you, Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a matter of curiosity, I know that the driver was involved in a 2018 rear end crash. I believe in the staff presentation, maybe it's in the draft report as well, I can't recall, but there was an indication that that was determined to be fatigue related. If I'm correct about that, how do we know that? Who made that determination? And apparently that's not something that we learned from Greyhound's records. How do we find out about that, and how do we know that it was fatigue related?
Yes, thank you for the question, Member Chapman. That investigation that crash took place in California on the I-5 near San Bernardino, California. And the California Highway Patrol did a thorough investigation on that crash where he rear-ended a moving tractor trailer, resulted in an injury, and they classified it as a fatigue-related crash.
Okay, so that determination was made by law enforcement.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. In 2017, this is, I mean, we're beating up on Greyhound here, and I have some fondness myself for Greyhound from some adventures in my earlier days, but I mean, I think there's certainly room for criticism here. In 2017, we issued a recommendation to Greyhound calling on them to, and I'm quoting, use industry best practices to establish a policy to more adequately address recurring unsafe driver behavior, to include effective remediation of behavior and establishment of suspension of thresholds for termination. That recommendation was classified as closed acceptable action because we were satisfied with Greyhound's response. And yet, we see here again some backsliding. There apparently is no policy, or at least no significant policy, in terms of progressive discipline. This is probably not a fair question, but what do we do about this? How do we make sure that a company that we've made recommendations to previously that has seemingly satisfied that recommendation, and then we come back and we find, and it's a number of areas here in this investigation where we found there had been backsliding. What do we do about that?
Well, thank you for the question, Member Chapman, and that's a great question. As mentioned earlier, when staff met with Greyhound in 2021 concerning the San Jose recommendations, we felt confident that they were going to successfully complete them based on their evidence and also the dialogue that we had with them. So it was shocking, quite frankly, when we went out there and during this crash investigation and found that these recommendations were not in their policies and procedures, and we had seen the backsliding on several of these different events we've been talking about today. So that is why staff is proposing a recommendation that Greyhound incorporate they incorporate those DMS events into their policies and procedures, so it's physically in their policies. Currently, Greyhound has three mechanisms for controlling safety. They have a corporate safety policy, they have a driver handbook, and they have a union contract. The DMS events that we're describing are not mentioned anywhere in those guides for drivers and for staff. And our recommendation is to make sure that they get put into their policies and procedures. And then furthermore, moving forward, highway staff is going to make sure and verify that these recommendations are closed. We will actually go and visit with Greyhound and make sure that they're closed as we move forward.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's appropriate. Chair, I don't have any other questions in this area. I do just want to stress, though, my concern about the backsliding here. I know we're all concerned about that. I mean, this is a terrible tragedy. I hope that the folks at Greyhound will take the lessons learned, take them seriously, and move forward frankly in a much more responsible way in terms of addressing these safety areas that we've identified in the investigation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're going to move on to question round 3. And that is focused on limited availability of truck parking. We will start with Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Can somebody define what a clear zone is for me?
Thank you, Member Graham. The clear zone concept is a traversable, unobstructed area beyond the edge of the travel lane for the recovery of errant vehicles. It's usually set at 30 feet for interstates.
And what can be in a clear zone?
Various things. Certainly objects, Member Graham, should not be within the clear zone. If it is within the clear zone, then it needs to be shielded. Shielding usually consists of some type of barrier.
Sometime. And the clear zone is included for entrance and exit ramps to rest areas. Is that correct?
Yes, that's an excellent question. In this particular case, the crash was adjacent to the gore area that was near the I-70 travel lanes and would be considered within the clear zone. As you get closer to the rest area where the ramp diverges from the main line, the clear zone concept may not apply.
Okay. So this is an excellent slide here. The graphic is very good. How close were the 3 combination vehicles to the travelway on the exit ramp?
Just 3 inches on either. 3 inches.
3 inches. Okay. So these vehicles were inside the clear zone and considered an obstacle. Is that correct?
That is correct. The combination vehicle was 8.5 feet wide. So there was 3 inches on either side to the edge of the shoulder. Essentially, the combination vehicle took up the entire space of the shoulder.
Entire shoulder. Okay. And so technically they were not supposed to be parked there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it illegal for these trucks to be parked in that space?
Yes, it is, per Illinois statute 11-1303.
Okay. Do other states have similar laws for this, preventing this?
Yes, they do.
Do all of them? Do we know?
Not a limited survey that we did, Member Graham, have statutes similar to Illinois statute 11-1303.
Okay. Do we know if law enforcement enforces this?
Great question. In terms of this particular crash, the drivers were not issue citations. Law enforcement faces a dilemma when a commercial driver needs to stop due to hours of service rules. I will let Mr. Fox elaborate on the hours of service rules and Mr. Prouty elaborate on the perspective of a former law enforcement officer, if I could.
Yes, regarding the hours of service in 2017, Member Graham, FMCSA mandated the ELD, the electronic logging rule, which meant that drivers have this electronic device that tracks their hours of service. And then prior to that, drivers had a paper log, which could be fudged, and drivers could maybe push on to a next rest area. But with the mandate, drivers have a hard stop. So they are forced to pull over and squeeze into a parking area. And if they don't, quite frequently, they will just park on the shoulders, or they'll drive through the rest area and park on the exit area after the rest area. They're in a quandary. Now, the hours of service does allow what's called, they are allowed to go to a rest area after, I'm sorry. There is, I'm losing my mind. There is a provision that they can, after their hours of service, they can do annotated in their logbook to go on to another rest area, but quite frequently they'll just stop at the rest area and not proceed. Personal conveyance, I'm sorry, I lost the thought. Personal conveyance allows them to go on to the next rest area, but quite frankly, they won't.
Yeah, understandable. And the next rest area we're aware is what, 76 miles away, and
Yes,
we're not sure of other places. So thank you. I may have a few more questions in the next round. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. On this personal conveyance issue, just to pick up on that, I mean, realistically, we really don't want people doing that any more than is necessary, because they're still driving, they're still on the road.
correct.
And presumably, if their rest or if their allowable period of driving is over and they're still driving, that's a safety problem.
Right, and it is a violation if they're using personal conveyance to further their load or cargo. That is a violation, and so it's a very delicate line. I mean, realistically, if a driver knows that there might be, let's say, another rest area that's close by, they may use that and get off the highway. But quite frankly, statistically, most drivers will just end their tour of duty when their hours of service has expired.
Yeah, understand. Did the investigation find that there were previous crashes involving combination vehicles at the Silver Lake rest area?
Thank you for the question, Member Chapman. Yes, within a 5-mile radius of the crash for the last 10 years, there were 2 other crashes that occurred at the Silver Lake rest area, both in the eastbound and westbound direction with trucks parked on the shoulder.
So those did involve combination vehicles. Again, they were parked in the clear zone on the exit ramps.
Correct.
So there are some statistics cited in the report. This is according to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. Total volume of combination vehicles in the U.S. increased from about 906,000 in 1970 to 2.98 million in 2020. So if I'm doing the math right here, well, I'm not going to try because I was a music major in college. You don't want me doing math, but that's a lot. It is the combination vehicle volume of traffic has increased very substantially. Yet the Silver Lake rest area has had 21 parking spots for commercial trucks since its construction in 1973. And the next available westbound rest area, as we already discussed, was 76 miles down I-70. And I'm guessing, frankly, that the parking is pretty limited there as well. So parking a truck on the shoulder is both prohibited and dangerous, but what other options do truck drivers have?
Truck drivers. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dane.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Member Chapman, that there are some resources available for drivers, such as the TPIMs that Mr. Walsh was speaking of, that does give drivers in some states where they have the notification of how many how many parking slots are available. And also there are apps being developed, such as Truck Hub, where you can go online and you can see where there is private parking that you can pay for and make a reservation.
So that's helpful, at least in terms of making information available to truckers so that they know where parking might be available. But the real problem here is capacity. I mean, if there's no additional capacity, knowing that there's no parking spaces at the next rest area is not terribly helpful either. In terms of our history, NTSB's history on this issue, when did we begin to recognize truck capacity or truck parking capacity as a significant safety problem?
I can first answer that question and ask Dr. Russell elaborate. Certainly with the Burnt Cabins, Pennsylvania crash that we investigated in 1998, that first highlighted the issues of trucks parked on the shoulder of exit ramps to rest areas. Staff believes there's limited funding at the federal and state level for the construction of new truck parking.
Yeah, so
I was going to jump in. Subsequent to Burnt Cabins was also NTSB safety study that highlighted the lack of capacity. And in that study, given the year 2000, it was also focused on increased information needs for truckers at the time.
So our awareness of this, certainly our formal involvement in this as an issue, goes back a couple of decades. And I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but it appears that essentially the same obstacles we were facing 2 decades ago are the same obstacles we're facing today. It's a funding issue. I'm guessing in some respects it might be more than funding. It could be available space, but this is a problem that has been around for a long time, and it's only getting worse. Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And this is actually, and the NTSB doesn't usually weigh in on the need for congressional funding for specific programs. So I do think this is a big deal, and I do think it is much needed. We mentioned throughout the docket, previous legislation, HR 2367, it's now HR 1659, which was introduced by Congressman Mike Bost from Illinois. It's a piece of bipartisan legislation that he's working to push on providing specific funding for constructing safety for rest areas to include parking for commercial motor vehicle drivers. Because as you said, Mr. Fox, it is a quandary. Do you continue driving or do you stop and get rest? That should not be the choice. Both of which, can be safety concerns, as we saw certainly as a result of this collision, but I'm not sure, well, actually I know the right solution isn't for folks to continue driving. In this case, AASHTO's guidance on spacing between rest stops is what? How many miles?
Generally a spacing of 30 to 40 miles, Chairman Hamady.
To the next rest stop?
Yes.
Yeah, so this one was well over.
Yes.
So you have a situation where you have tired drivers. And so, it does cost money to, improve rest areas. And there is federal funding, but these federal funding programs, whether it's federal aid highway funding programs like the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program or National Highway Freight Program, or the National Highway Performance Program, or its discretionary grant opportunities like the mega grants and several others that have been authorized, there's competing priorities and needs at the state level, and you're essentially choosing between efficiency and safety, or one safety project over another safety project. And so what the legislation does, that is mentioned in at least one or two parts of our docket, which I thought was excellent, write-up, was the need to have a specific grant program for commercial motor vehicle facilities to allow parking to address rest, because it is a problem. You have and again, I understand that these three trucks were parked illegally, but the choice is, do you continue to drive fatigued? That's not a good choice. So we do have to we do have to provide more funding to improve existing rest areas, to build new ones. It is not a new issue. The National Coalition on Truck Parking, as we referenced in several areas in our docket, it includes AASHTO, the American Trucking Association, OIDA, the Owner Operator Independent Drivers Association, Truck Stop Operators, Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. They have a number of recommendations that go back years. And in fact, when they did a survey of states where there are parking shortages, Illinois was one of them, and that was back in a 2019 survey. So there is a documented problem. There's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 studies at least that have been conducted. So, I do think it's critical. I do want to give a lot of credit to Mike Bost for introducing that bipartisan legislation. Hopefully we can get movement on it. I just had a comment on that, and so I'll call on Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Good points. I did look at the Bureau of Statistics there, talking about there's roughly in 2020, there's 3 million trucks out on the road, these larger trucks. And I did the math and I looked at the parking spaces. There's roughly, I compute about, for all those trucks, there's only about 10% parking for those, roughly about 300,000 spaces. Granted, not all 3 million will be on the road at one time, but I think the numbers show that we obviously need some more parking spaces out there for sure. And I noticed the vast majority of these parking spaces are alternative parking spaces, like truck stops, restaurants, travel plazas, gas stations, things like that. So there's obviously a need there. Is there anything the states can do to combat this truck parking problem?
I can answer that question first and ask Dr. Russell, add any additional information. From the perspective of Illinois, they've added over 200 truck parking spaces at 5 rest stops at a cost of $53 million. The Silver Lake rest area was not one of them. So they are adding truck parking capacity. They are developing truck parking information management systems at their rest stops, all their rest stops. Dr. Russell?
We highlight a little bit of what North Carolina is doing just as an example. So one area that states are employing is using way stations and other places that might be closed to add supplemental parking where possible. And again, implementing regional information systems to the best of their ability. States are ultimately the ones that would implement or build new parking in cooperation with DOT. So they would have to explore the additional funding opportunities that we're recommending.
Great, thank you for that. That's all the questions in this round for me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Chapman.
No further questions for me, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, so with that, we're going to move on to a catch-all round, fourth round. If there's anything, any safety issues that we did not discuss that board members would like to discuss, Member Graham?
I have no further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Chapman?
And no further questions from me either, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, my only question is the one I pretty much ask every time, especially for those who are watching or may have lost a loved one or been injured in this collision or involved in some way, because some were not injured. I would ask this question to Safety Recommendations and Communications Office. This is not the end of what the NTSB does when we finalize an investigation and issue a final report. What are our next steps?
Yes, thank you, Chair, for that question. I mean, we, obviously, we have a lot of work to do here. We work with our government, our fellow counterparts in government. We work with industry stakeholders to make sure that we communicate the findings of this report, that we are urging safety progress on these recommendations. We'll engage with the recommendations recipients to ensure they understand the actions that are required to further safety in motor coach operations, truck parking, and we continue to monitor their progress toward implementing the recommended actions. This includes working with the recipients to identify alternatives to address the safety issues when they believe, we need to make adjustments on specific safety recommendations. But, we had a nice discussion on this earlier, and obviously, there's a lot of work to do on the congressional side as well. We've been in close contact with the members of Congress who are interested in the truck parking issue, and will continue to do so and work with them as a partner to make sure that some of these recommendations are implemented. And then additionally, we share information through available communication channels to amplify these recommendations through social media, through engagements with the media elsewhere, and we'll just continue to work until we can satisfy these recommendations.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So now we will go ahead and move towards deliberation of findings, probable cause, and draft safety recommendations, and then the full report. So Mr. Curtis, will you please read the proposed findings?
Certainly, Chair. As a result of this investigation, staff proposes 21 findings. Number 1, none of the following were factors in the crash. 1, highway design, markings, lighting, and signage. 2, weather and roadway conditions. 3, the motor coach's mechanical condition. 4, the motor coach driver's medical qualification, training and experience, cell phone use, or use of alcohol or other drugs. And 5, a sudden impairing or incapacitating medical event affecting the motor coach driver. Number 2, the emergency response was timely and adequate. Number 3, the crash dynamics, failure to navigate the roadway geometry, and passenger statements are consistent with a fatigued motor coach driver. Number 4, the motor coach driver's medical conditions increased his risk of fatigue at the time of the crash. Number 5, the motor coach driver's prolonged period awake, including his decision not to use provided rest facilities, contributed to his fatigue at the time of the crash. Number 6, Greyhound's variable scheduling practices led to the motor coach driver's irregular sleep schedule, resulting in his fatigued state. Number 7, had Greyhound implemented a comprehensive fatigue management program, the likelihood of fatigued driving and the crash risk would have been reduced. Number 8, had Greyhound implemented a progressive discipline policy, the company could have mitigated the motor coach driver's unsafe driving behavior before the crash. Number 9, Greyhound's incomplete and paper-based personnel records likely contributed to insufficient driver oversight and a lack of disciplinary actions for the motor coach driver. Number 10, Greyhound was not using its driver monitoring system to its full potential for driver oversight, such as incorporating a progressive discipline policy, detecting driver behavior indicative of fatigued driving, and providing real-time driver alerts. Therefore, the company missed the opportunity to identify that the motor coach driver was at high risk for a crash. Number 11, proactive application of safety management cycle processes for all safety policies would allow Greyhound and other motor carriers to mitigate deficiencies and encourage robust safety culture beyond compliance with federal regulations. Number 12, federal guidance on proactively using driver monitoring systems to provide driver coaching can encourage motor carriers such as Greyhound to implement effective policies that reduce unsafe driver behaviors that can lead to a crash. Number 13, the commercial motor vehicle hours of service regulations for motor coach and bus drivers would be more effective if they addressed the scientifically established risk of drivers operating during the nighttime window of circadian low. Number 14, had the seriously injured motor coach passengers seated outside the intrusion zone properly worn the available lap shoulder belts, they would have been more likely to stay in their seating compartments, which would have reduced their injuries. Number 15, had the motor coach driver conducted a pre-trip safety briefing to the passengers when they departed Indianapolis, informing them of the availability of the seat belts and the legal requirement to wear them, passengers might have been more likely to be belted when the crash occurred and their injuries reduced. Number 16, combination vehicles routinely park on the shoulder of the exit ramp to the Silver Lake rest area due to recurring lack of available truck parking, which increases the risk of them being struck by an errant highway vehicle. Number 17, the combination vehicles were unsafely parked in the highway clear zone of the exit ramp to the Silver Lake rest area, decreasing the motor coach driver's ability to stop or return his vehicle to the roadway after it departed the travel lane. Number 18, the limited truck parking capacity and subsequent unsafe parking observed at the Silver Lake rest area were consistent with a lack of access to long-term parking spaces for combination vehicles on the national highway system, as reported by surveys resulting from Jason's Law. Number 19, continued deployment of the truck parking information management system can improve access to truck parking and allow for targeted expansion of access and usage, although it is not a standalone solution. Number 20, truck parking shortages require solutions that increase parking capacity as well as information about parking availability along the nation's highway system. And 21, state efforts to implement the truck parking information management system and increase truck parking capacity, such as in North Carolina, Illinois, and Oregon, are positive. However, individual states are limited in what they can do, and a centralized effort can more broadly address the safety risk caused by lack of available truck parking throughout the country. Chair?
Thank you very much, Mr. Curtis. Are there any amendments to the proposed findings? Hearing none. Do I have a motion to adopt as presented?
So moved.
I second. Let's move to a vote. Tom?
Aye.
No, wrong Tom. Tom McMurray.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. Yes, Board, this is a vote on the findings as presented. Also, if you vote yes, please say aye. If you vote no, please say nay. And for this particular meeting, Member Graham has the proxy of Member Inman. So when I call on Member Inman, Member Graham, if you can enter his vote at that time.
Very good. Yes.
All right. Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Inman by proxy.
He votes aye.
And Chair Homendy.
Aye.
Okay, Chair, the vote tally is obviously 4 in favor.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Mr. Curtis to read the proposed probable cause.
Staff proposes the following probable cause. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the Highland, Illinois crash was the motorcoach driver's departure of the motorcoach from the travel lanes onto the shoulder of the exit ramp due to fatigue. Contributing to the motorcoach driver's fatigue was his irregular work rest schedule and prolonged time awake. Contributing to the crash was the failure of Greyhound Lines, Inc. to mitigate the motorcoach driver's recurring unsafe driving behaviors. Also contributing to the crash were the 3 combination vehicles parked on the shoulder of the exit ramp, although prohibited by Illinois Statute Section 11-1303 due to the recurring lack of available truck parking. Contributing to the injury severity for some of the motorcoach passengers was their lack of seatbelt use.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Any amendments to the draft probable cause? Hearing none. Motion to adopt the draft probable cause.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, great. And we'll move on to a vote.
All
Go
right,
ahead.
Board, this is a vote. Yes, Chair, this is a vote on the probable cause as presented. Member Graham.
Aye.
Member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Inman by proxy.
Aye.
And Chair Homendy.
Aye.
Okay, Chair, obviously it's a vote of 4 in favor of the probable cause as presented.
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Curtis, can you read the proposed safety recommendations?
Certainly, Chair. As a result of this investigation, staff proposes the following 11 new safety recommendations. 2 to the U.S. Department of Transportation. Number 1, expand efforts to use the truck parking information management system to identify rest areas in critical need of additional truck parking. Number 2, pursue available options to increase commercial vehicle parking capacity on highways, such as establishing a grant program for states, local governments, and other eligible entities to increase parking for commercial motor vehicles. assessing the feasibility of expanding eligibility for grant programs to allow for parking facility maintenance costs, evaluating the benefits of ending restrictions on private development of rest areas, and seeking additional congressional appropriations as necessary. One recommendation to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Number 3, provide guidance through a passenger carrier safety publication on your website, encouraging passenger motor carriers to implement safety management cycle processes and reassess these processes during changes in ownership or executive management, and periodically after implementation of new safety policies or technologies. 6 recommendations to Greyhound Lines, Inc. Number 4, develop and implement a fatigue management program based on the North American Fatigue Management Program to educate your drivers, dispatchers, and other employees about fatigue, its causes, and its countermeasures. Number 5, revise driver scheduling policies to reduce scheduling variability that results in irregular work-rest cycles. Number 6, create an electronic personnel file management system to ensure that all driver records, including those pertaining to disciplinary action, are easily accessible to terminal managers and safety personnel both on and off site. Number 7, incorporate recorded driver monitoring system events into safety and disciplinary policies, including detection and prevention of fatigued driving, allowable number of critical safety violations a driver can have in a specific time frame, such as per month or quarter, and procedures to hold poorly performing drivers accountable to include both coaching and disciplinary action up to and including termination for exceeding established thresholds. Number 8, establish a written policy to proactively apply safety management cycle processes beyond compliance reviews to assess the ongoing effectiveness of new safety policies and technologies after they are adopted. Number 9, establish policies to require pre-trip safety briefings every time there is a change of driver at every terminal before departure, regardless of departure time, and every time the motor coach takes on new passengers. This should include driver briefings for awareness on which states they will be driving through that have mandatory enforcement of seatbelts. At a minimum, briefings should include the following information: the availability of seatbelts, the potential legal requirements to wear them in mandatory enforcement states, and how to fasten them, ways to address urgent board safety concerns, ways to address urgent onboard safety concerns, including dialing 911, and the location and use of the fire extinguisher and the emergency exits. One recommendation to the National Coalition on Truck Parking. Number 10, publish an updated report that proposes solutions to truck parking capacity shortages, including expanding grant programs and funding of maintenance costs, ending restrictions on private development at rest areas, enhancing the truck parking information management system coverage to identify areas in critical need of additional parking, and projecting future truck volume and parking needs. And one recommendation to the American Bus Association and the United Motorcoach Association. Number 11, inform your members about the Highland, Illinois crash and urge them to develop fatigue management programs based on the North American Fatigue Management Program to educate drivers and other employees about fatigue, its causes, and its countermeasures. Staff also proposes reiterating the following safety recommendation to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Recommendation H-12-30. Incorporate scientifically based fatigue mitigation strategies into the hours of service regulations for passenger carrying drivers who operate during the nighttime window of circadian low. Lastly, Staff proposes reiterating and classifying the following safety recommendation to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Recommendation H-22-4. Provide guidance to motor carriers to proactively use the onboard video event recorder information to aid in driver training and ensure driver compliance with regulatory rules essential for safe operation. Staff proposes classifying this recommendation open, unacceptable response. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Curtis. Are there any amendments to the proposed recommendations? No amendments. Okay, motion to adopt.
So moved.
Second.
Great. Mr. McMurray.
Okay, board, this is a vote in favor of the recommendations as presented. Member Graham,
Aye.
Member Chapman,
Aye.
Member Inman by proxy,
Aye.
and Chair Hamady.
Aye.
All right, Chair, 4 in favor.
Thank you very much. Are there any amendments to the final report? Hearing none, I'm going to offer a motion to adopt the final report.
Second.
Great, thank you. Mr. McMurray.
All right, board, this is a vote in favor of the final report as presented. Member Graham,
Aye.
Member Chapman,
Aye.
Member Inman by proxy,
Aye.
and Chair Hamady.
Aye.
All right, Chair, 4 in favor of adopting the report as presented.
Can you give me 1 second? I'm having technical difficulties, as always is with virtual. Okay, thank you very much. Now, does any member wish to reserve the right to file a concurring or dissenting statement? I would like to reserve the right. Would any other board member?
I would like to reserve that right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. That's Member Chapman and me for those recording. And I appreciate it. I think this brings us to the end of our deliberations. And I would like to thank Member Graham and Member Chapman for their preparation and participation in today's meeting. We did discuss important topics that will benefit the final report and inform our safety recommendations. I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to the NTSB team, including our colleagues in the Office of Highway Safety, the Office of Research and Engineering, the Office of General Counsel, and the Office of the Managing Director for their work over the course of this investigation and in the development of an excellent report. I also, on behalf of my colleagues, want to express our appreciation to our fellow colleagues in the Transportation Disaster Assistance Division for their support of the victims and families touched by this tragedy, as well as the following offices for their vital support of the meeting. And that's the Office of Chief Information Officer, the Digital Services Division, and the Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications for its diligent work and advocacy to improve safety. When acted upon, as you heard, the recommendations we've issued today will save lives. I'd also like to thank the following organizations for their collaboration with us on scene and their role as parties to our investigation: the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Illinois State Police, the Illinois Department of Transportation, the Highland Parent Fire Protection District, the City of Highland Fire Department, and Greyhound Lines Incorporated. The NTSB works under what we call the party system, meaning we bring together technical experts from those involved in the accident to help us gather and develop the facts around the investigation. Parties are not part of the analysis or development of the findings, probable causes, or safety recommendations, but they are critical to helping us obtain information we need to carry out our critical safety mission. At the same time, parties get access to what we're finding in real time over the course of our investigation, so they don't have to wait until the issuance of our final report to take action. They can take early action to improve safety. Finally, the NTSB looks forward to working with the following organizations to implement our recommendations: the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Greyhound, the National Coalition on Truck Parking, the American Bus Association, and the United Motorcoach Association. With that, I'd like to once again offer our deepest condolences to those personally affected by this crash. I know that the NTSB will work diligently to implement our safety recommendations so a tragedy like this one never, ever happens again. Before we adjourn, I want to acknowledge an important member of Team NTSB who's retiring after 30 years of federal service, and that's Barbara Czech. This is her last board meeting. So Barb has served as the director of the Office of Research and Engineering since August 2023. Before that, she was deputy director, a role she took on in 2016, not long after becoming a member of the Senior Executive Service. For those not familiar, RE, or Research and Engineering Office, is an investigative office providing scientific and technical expertise for NTSB accident investigations in all modes of transportation. As director, Barb has led a team of world-renowned experts who analyze wreckage in our materials laboratory, examine recorded electronic audio and video information captured by aircraft, vessels, and train communication systems, just to name a few. They reconstruct accidents, they conduct special safety studies and research, and provide medical and toxicological expertise for investigations. Barb joined the agency in 1996 as a survival factors investigator for the Office of Highway Safety Central Region. She has held numerous leadership positions at the agency over her tenure, including Deputy Director of the Office of Rail, Pipeline, and Hazardous Materials Investigations, Deputy Director for Investigations in the Office of Highway Safety, and as Assistant Managing Director, among many others. So Barb, thank you for your contributions to safety. Your work has undoubtedly saved countless lives and prevented injuries in all modes of transportation. So on behalf of all of us, thank you for your service, both to this agency and to the nation. I want to give Member Graham and Member Chapman an opportunity for any closing remarks that you'd like to make, starting with Member Graham.
Thank you, Chair. And I too would congratulate Barb on the great work she's done at the agency over the years and thank her for many years of service. You will be missed, and best of luck in the future. I want to thank the staff for the great work they did on this investigation. I want to thank everybody for their flexibility in moving to the virtual environment for this board meeting. And finally, I too want to express my sympathies to those who were affected by this terrible tragedy, and I'll let them know that my thoughts and prayers are with them in the years to come. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. I do just want to congratulate our staff again for outstanding work. Member Graham, thank you for your flexibility and for the good work you're doing. I know you're on launch duty right now. We appreciate what you're doing up in New York. And certainly to Barb, thank you for everything that you've done. You are just a shining example of the outstanding people we have in federal service. We're going to miss you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Graham, and thank you, Member Chapman. And with that, we stand adjourned.